Translating is not just a linguistic process. Several studies carried out over the years reveal that it involves mental operations more complex than what was previously believed. Before starting their studies, experts have asked themselves a fundamental question. How does the professional's brain run every day from one language to another? Before answering this question, it's useful to remind that in the front left hemisphere is located the Broca area, responsible for the language expression, and over the temporal area is situated the vernix area, in charge of linguistic comprehension through connections with the memory's mechanisms. So translation is mentally possible only through the higher brain functions activity. The art of translation is based on the connection between long-term memory that allows the translator to apply the techniques learned during his apprenticeship and the frontal and parietal lobes, which enable him to analyze stylistic and grammar exigencies of the text. However, let's proceed gradually, trying to analyze exactly what happens in a translator's mind while carrying out a written mediation. At the beginning, the source text is uprooted from the original context and plunged in the translator's mental reality. Therefore, it's possible to state that it doesn't work with the source text, but with its mental projection. In order to have a complete translation competence, a rational macrotextual strategy will be necessary too. Therefore, reflecting on the mental areas responsible for the management and the analysis of visual impulses, and also for the understanding of written languages, medical researchers applied to linguistic mediation discovered that the left hemisphere seems to be more involved in decoding and producing phonological, morphological, syntactic, and lexical components, while the right one is in charge of understanding the implicit meanings. Language-specific areas located in the left dominant hemisphere are the Broca's anterior cortex area, the vernix posterior cortex area, and the precentral gyrus in the higher cortical area. The translating process begins right when the translator's eyes start reading the words of the original document. Therefore, it is not wrong at all to declare translation to have, so to speak, a visual incipit. So the eyes, subject to the so-called primary stimulation, will carry out the first analysis and selection of the words and the structure of the original text. As soon as the mediator starts reading the required document, his visual cortex will be subject to stimulation. To be more precise, the eye will be the organ that, with its four main components, cornea, anterior chamber, lens, and posterior chamber, will be able to transfer the images to the retina, the eye's most delicate part, that, with its photoreceptors, will transform the images into electrical pulses, which, with their information, will be sent to the retinal neurons, which will carry out a first analysis of the visual signal. The axons of the ganglion cells gather themselves together in order to form the optic nerve, a sort of natural cable that leads out the visual information from the retina up to the higher centers. At first to the lateral geniculate body, a part of the brain that controls the visual information from the retina, and from there to the cortical areas. Cortical stimulation begins as soon as the visual impulse reaches the primary visual cortex, a sensory cortex also known as a striate cortex V1 or Brodmann area 17, located around and within the calcarine fissure of the occipital lobe, one of the 5 fissures that mark the border between the lobes. In close proximity of this area are the extrastriate cortical areas, also named Brodmann area 18 and 19 or V2 and V3. Those two occipital areas are involved not only in visual activities, but also in the analysis, recognition and interpretation of images elaborated by the Brodmann area 17. The V1 area can transmit the information by two main paths, the so-called primary pathways. These directions, covered by the information of the primary and secondary cortex, are known also as dorsal and ventral stream. The ventral stream, generally known as the Watt pathway, is the one on which we will focus on our scientific observations, because it's the main stream assigned to the analysis of language and also to the data gathering or the conceptual understanding of linguistic constructions. At the very moment in which the images transformed into electric impulses reach the inferior temporal cortex, they start to stimulate the area that more than any other makes the translator able to analyze or even simply to read any written text. The so-called fusiform gyrus, the temporal lobe section located in Brodmann area 37 and commonly known as discontinuous occipitotemporal gyrus. According to neurologists, this brain area, also called visual word form area (VWFA), is the one that controls the visual recognition of words, because it's able to recognize immediately the form of the letters which make up them. However, communicating with Wernicke's and Broca areas, it's also able to carry out rapid associations between terms and get, through the long-time memory, all the information necessary to translate the document. The first part of translation's mental process is based on a series of neural activations whose main objective will be to answer questions like: what language am I going to translate? Which are the stylistic canons of the text? What is the linguistic register used by the author? What is the terminology of the text? During a translation, the memory sectors can be reached only by passing through the nerve centers that structure the occipital lobe, run through the optic nerve and connect themselves to the other cerebral lobes. Among them, the frontal one with its right section will be able to create the memory, while with the left one in the Broca area it will create and control the words. In addition to the prefrontal cortex, the parietal lobe will play a fundamental role in this process as well, especially with its left section, indispensable for the comprehension of written and spoken language and words memorization. In the end, also the temporal lobe will be needed, due to its capability to develop mechanisms and complex cognitive functions, such as memory, and to supervise the analysis of the spoken language and the word selection. According to the kind of work that translators have to face, the brain will select the suitable information so that the target text has the same structure and strength of the source one. Through all the stimulations that the translator mind will receive from the text, it will propagate the electric impulses in all memorizing areas of the lobes, in order to find the area in which the information needed to translate the text is stored. So, stimulation will pass through the four lobes, reaching also the hippocampus, the special area of the limbic system in charge of transferring information in the LTM. This transfer is carried out thanks to the hippocampal areas of the dentate gyrus and the temporal lobe's convolution. All these areas, together with the entorhinal cortex, will use the fornix and the mammillary bodies in order to create the fragments of the long-term memory, and the cognitive and conceptual maps that everyone may consult depending on the topic or the situation. So, that's the point of arrival of nerve stimulation collected by sensory receptors of the translator's mind. This is the most sheltered and deepest area of the entire nervous system, the place where the LTM is kept, a place with almost unlimited mnemonic potential that stores data, experiences, images, and any other kind of information. This is the process activated in translator's mind and represents the most powerful tool of any translator. The complex mental activity of a translator on the point of translating something is amazing and fascinating because it involves several cerebral areas and a huge number of synapses and neurons that cooperate in order to get all the information needed to complete the work. However, the process won't end with the arrival in the hippocampus and the identification of the data required, but will continue until the first translation is complete. Once this long and elaborate procedure is complete, the structure of the text will still be raw, so the translator will activate another mental process in order to refine and correct the syntactic, lexical, and stylistic characteristics of his translation. The areas activating during this operation will be always the Wernicke's and the Broca areas, and the left part of the parietal lobe, that will analyze lines, words, and syntactic structures, sending, if necessary, other electric impulses in the depths of the brain, to reactivate the hippocampus in search of new synonyms and terms that could be used as corrective elements of the text.